Elite Facts presents
15 real-life heroes that have changed the world.
15.
Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is considered to be one of America's greatest orators, and he was eventually assassinated because of his work in advancing the Civil Rights Campaign. He was an activist and humanitarian, as well as a devout Christian who believed that he could change the world with nonviolent protests, which he did. He organized marches, parades, and campaigns against racial segregation and dedicated his life to overcoming this racist policy which the government held in place. Quote, "I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Dr. King was killed for his determination to bring justice to people who were judged and treated horribly because of the color of their skin.
14.
Oskar Schindler. Oskar Schindler was a German industrialist who was part of the Nazi Party and is credited for saving the lives of over 1,000 Jewish people. He did this by employing them in his factories in Poland, where he provided the army with enamel cookware. And as time went on, he then bribed members of the Nazi Party with money and gifts so that they would not harm his Jewish workers. Initially, his business was set up to make him a wealthy man, and he hired Jews because they were allocated a cheaper wage implemented by the Nazi regime. This changed, however, when Schindler learned of the devastating goings-on inside the concentration camps, and he fought to protect as many Jewish people as he could. After the war, he was in danger of being arrested as a criminal of war, and he went bankrupt after spending all of his money on bribes to the Nazis and on his employees. He later survived on donations from Schindlerjuden, Schindler's Jews, sent from all over the world by the Jews that he saved during the war.
13.
William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare is one of the world's most famous playwrights, and his work has shaped and influenced the English language. What made Shakespeare's work stand the test of time was how well he was able to capture the true colors of humanity. He understood people, and he broadcasted this knowledge to the entire world through his art. He was an exceptional anthropologist, and his plays and sonnets are basically revealing the true nature of humans. Whether it's jealousy or love, he was able to capture how these emotions drive someone and how it can affect them and others. He also created sayings that we still use today, and that's pretty impressive.
12.
William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was an English philanthropist and politician who actively fought for the abolishment of the slave trade. Britain initially became involved in the slave trade in the 16th century, and although the trade saw Britain being a superpower of the world, it came at a cost, and a moral one at that. Slaves were used and treated worse than animals for manual labor, and Wilberforce was one of the few people who saw this as being morally wrong. Wilberforce urged others to see that slavery was a national crime and it must be addressed and eradicated within society. It took him and a group of others years to show people how corrupt society had become and that these slaves were human beings too. The abolishment of slavery occurred in 1833, and Wilberforce died 3 days after hearing that the legislation had been passed.
11.
Withhold Pilecki. Pilecki experienced the true horrors of war voluntarily. Pilecki was a member of the Polish resistance, and when unknown camps started appearing all over Poland during the 1940s, he made it his mission to discover what secrets the Nazi Party was hiding. He deliberately got himself arrested by the Nazis so that he could infiltrate one of the camps, Auschwitz. He spent 2.5 years in Auschwitz, sending back his intelligence to the Polish government so that they were able to convince their allies that the concentration camps were death camps. He sent his intelligence through a radio that he built in the camp with smuggled parts. He later escaped and sent information to London, where they assumed that the figures provided were clearly exaggerated. They did not believe that 5 million people were killed over 5 years at the camps. His own country then sentenced him to death with charges of espionage and illegally crossing the borders under a false name. Poland killed their greatest war hero of all time, but he was later rehabilitated and given a promotion to colonel in 1990, 42 years after his execution.
10.
Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft is potentially one of the first feminists to directly state how and why change needs to happen. Mary was an English writer, philosopher, and a pioneer for women's rights. She wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1792, and despite her clear understanding of how to socially address the problem of women living in a patriarchal environment, she was more famous for her relationships than her writing. She argued that the only reason that women were seen as inferior to men was because of their lack of education, which wasn't allowed, and she believed that both men and women should be treated as having a rational mind. She is considered one of the first feminists, and her work is still considered important today.
9,
Emily Davison. In 1906, Emily Davison joined the Women's Social and Political Union, which was formed 3 years earlier by Emmeline Parkhurst. The members of this group were women who were determined to fight for women to have equal rights with men, and made history in doing so. Davison joined the group full-time, but became a violent and militant activist who went against the etiquette of WSPU and was arrested 9 times, and was force-fed on a number of occasions. While it isn't believed to have been a suicidal intention to the cause, Davison died in 1913 when she collided with the king's horse and was trampled to death. It was most likely her intention to grab the bridle or attach the WSPU flag to the horse, but whatever her intention, it went awry and Davison sadly died due to her injuries. While her life was a big price to pay for the suffragette cause, it's important to remember the lengths that Davison and even your own ancestors went through in order to simply have a say in how their nation was governed. Be sure to use your vote.
8,
Joan of Arc. Whether you believe her divine rights and revelations or not, Joan of Arc had a positive influence over the French army before her execution in 1431. It's claimed that Joan could hear voices in the form of saints in her head, and she saw them clearly when they came to her to deliver her a message from God. Whether the call from God was in fact a call from God at all, her involvement in the planning and execution of military decisions were positive, not only for morale, but they were able to advance. For a girl who died at 19, her determination to do what she believed was right is admirable, and despite people thinking that she was a witch or that the voices were that of the devil, she had to gain their trust and in doing so, helped the king fight a war. Bearing in mind that this was the daughter of a farmer who couldn't read or write, and the king trusted her with her advice, you could say that she was sort of a big deal.
7,
Jane Addams. Not only was Addams a pioneer for women's suffrage, she was also determined to make world peace a reality in her lifetime. She was a committed pacifist and peace activist, and even won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931 for her efforts in her humanitarian campaigns. She founded the Women's International League for Peace in 1919 and worked tirelessly for years to get governments to sign peace agreements. Addams helped a lot of groups that were considered minorities at the time: women, children, and immigrants. She worked hard to stop the exploitation of child labor. She helped the poor, and she set up centers for immigrants. She taught women that they were valued for more than just their ability to be mothers, and she called on the middle class to use their time and wealth to help exercise their civic duties.
6,
Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks is famous for one thing, and that is refusing to give up her seat to a white man on a bus. Rosa was an African-American woman who is now known as the First Lady of Civil Rights and the mother of the Freedom Movement for this act of defiance. It all began on December 1st, 1955, when Rosa refused to listen to the bus driver who ordered her to give up her seat for a white commuter in the colored section, as the white section was filled up. Ms. Parks said, quote, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically, or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. I was not old, although some people have an image of me as being old then. I was 42. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in." Rosa was arrested for this act of defiance, all because her skin was a different color. She became a symbol of resistance against racial segregation and the Montgomery bus boycott, and although in the long run the fight of racial equality was achieved, Rosa's personal life became a living hell. She lost her job and received death threats for years because of her involvement in fighting for civil rights.
5,
Ryan White. Ryan White was a teenager from Indiana who became a national poster boy for AIDS and HIV campaigns across the country after he was diagnosed. As the disease wasn't really understood at that time in the 1980s, it was really only associated with homosexual men who were known to contract the disease. However, Ryan was a hemophiliac and contracted the disease in 1984 from a contaminated blood treatment. Ryan was expelled from his school for having this disease, and everyone was scared that they would contract it. And in doing so, the media became involved, which shot Ryan to fame. During his short lifetime, he was able to spread awareness for the disease and helped people to understand that it wasn't only contracted through sexual relations.
4,
Candy Lightner. Candace Lynn Lightner is the reason that there are laws against drinking and driving. She's the organizer and president of MAD, which stands for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and the object of the organization is to promote the dangers of driving while intoxicated. She was also trying to create legislation that would make this act a criminal offense and how tougher sentences should be implemented. This is the result of her 13-year-old daughter being killed by a truck driver who was not only driving while intoxicated, but was also a repeat offender. She received the President's Volunteer Action Award for her humanitarian services to the public, and she later became the president of the We Save Lives campaign, which campaigns against those who drive while drunk, are distracted, or are under the influence of drugs.
3,
The unknown protester. This man hasn't revealed himself, so he's simply referred to as the Tank Man or the unknown protester. The Tank Man temporarily stopped the progression of a column of tanks on the morning of June 5, 1989, armed only with 2 shopping bags that he carried in each hand. Despite the tanks trying to drive around him, he simply continued to step in front of their path in an attempt to stop them. Considering the man was carrying his shopping implies that he was on his way home and that this action wasn't planned. This occurred on the day after the Chinese government declared that they would violently crack down on all Tiananmen protests, and after speaking to one of the crew members of the tank, he quickly stood in their way as they once again tried to maneuver around him. The man was later dragged away so that the tanks could move on their way, but no one knows what happened to the Tank Man, or even if he's still alive.
2,
Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking is a man who has defied all physical, emotional, and academic boundaries in his lifetime. Hawking suffers from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a motor neuron disease that has left him paralyzed, and people usually recognize him for the American robotic-sounding speech-generating device that allows him to communicate. Not only has his determination defied the doctor's predictions of his 2-year life expectancy in 1963, but he's also dedicated his life to the world of academia. His book, A Brief History of Time, discusses his own theories of cosmology, and he is the director of research at the Center for Theoretical Cosmology within the University of Cambridge. Despite his disease, which is a severe disadvantage not only for his personal life but for his research too, he's married with children and is continuing his research in order for us to better understand the world in its scientific form.
1,
Kyle Carpenter. William Kyle Carpenter is the youngest living soldier to ever receive the Medal of Honor. He received the prestigious award for his outstanding bravery while on tour of Afghanistan. Carpenter shielded his friend from a hand grenade that was thrown on the rooftop where they were based in November of 2010. Both men survived thanks to Kyle's actions. Carpenter was 21 years old at the time, and throwing his body onto a live grenade resulted in him losing most of his teeth and his right eye. He also shattered his jaw and broke his arm in a number of places. He says that he can't remember the blast, and as there are no eyewitnesses, doctors confirmed that his injuries were the result of his decision to throw himself on top of the grenade and shield his friend. He said, quote, "I'm still here and kicking, and I have all my limbs, so you'll never hear me complain." After hearing about this, you can never really complain about a cold or anything again.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.